Welcome to the Datamark Virtual Public Safety Conference, to our first panel of the conference, Together at Last, Building a Public Safety and GIS Bond. I want to introduce everyone to our panelists. And let me make sure here, I'm going to pause my share. So now we should be able to see the speakers as they speak in your webinar interface. So I want to introduce everyone to on the panel. Glad to have Jared Teeney with us, who's the 911 director at Dearborn County, Indiana. If you want to give a quick introduction to yourself there, Jared.
Hey everyone, hope you're having a good time with this virtual conference. It's something new to me. First time I've been on a Zoom meeting. So just joining you from Dearborn County, Indiana, and glad to be with everyone today.
Great, thanks for joining us. So we also have with us from Merced, California, in California's Central Valley, Jean Barrera, who's the GIS manager at the County of Merced. Jean, you want to give a quick intro to yourself?
Yeah, I like Jeff said, I've been working with GIS as a manager here for the last couple of years now, and have recently been acquainted more with NextGen and hoping to share what I know with the rest of the group.
Great, thanks for being here. And then also Jason Bivens, who's the National Business Development Lead here at Datamark, but in a former life was a 911 director in a couple different locations. Want to say hello, Jason?
Hey, good afternoon or morning, everybody, depending on where you are. Like Jeff said, my current role is in business development with Datamark, but the last 10 years before joining the team, I spent as a 911 director in large municipalities, the last being the County of Santa Clara in Silicon Valley. So I think this is going to be a great conversation, and I'm really excited to talk more about the bond between public safety officials and GIS officials.
Great, thanks for being here as well, Jason. So I've got just a quick introduction to this because I don't want to take up the time. I think the lessons learned here from actual practitioners in the field is going to be much more valuable than a presentation that I could show for you. But I just wanted to level set and kind of set the stage. Talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities in NextGen 911, particularly about GIS. Now, these roles are found in NENA standards and discussed about what their responsibilities are. But I want to make sure that everybody is aware of them. The 911 authority, of course, is ultimately the responsible party for GIS data in NextGen 911, even though they don't have to become GIS professionals and practitioners themselves. But because they are responsible for the operation of the system in general, they're also responsible for GIS data getting there and that it's to the appropriate level of accuracy and completeness. In the middle, you find the addressing authority, who has always been a part of the 911 community despite never having really been recognized in NENA standards or in many formal ways. But the addressing authority is the government department that assigns addresses, as the name would imply. It could range from public works to planning. And even in some cases, you have public safety departments that are also addressing authorities in their given jurisdiction. And then another new role that's added to the public safety community in NextGen 911 is that of GIS data providers. They maintain the GIS data. Now, it may be the case that a 911 authority, in order to get what they need done for NextGen 911, becomes a multiple hat seat, in that they are the 911 authority, they are the addressing authority, and that they are the GIS data provider. But in most cases, those are going to be distributed in some form or fashion, and may even find themselves with multiple GIS data providers, multiple addressing authorities to sort of wrangle and get together and make sure that everything is in working shape. So with that brief introduction, oh, you don't see my desktop, do you? Let's try it again. No? Maybe. Anyways, in any case, there we go, resume show. That's what I wanted to hit. So you saw me discuss that. Now you can kind of see my clever graphic because I don't want that to go unused. I'll go ahead and turn the screen share off here. And we're just going to be on video, I hope. And again, just as a way of, for housekeeping, if you have questions, we want you to use the Q&A panel as a participant to throw questions at this esteemed panel, because they've got a lot of good experience going through these, the pain that can sometimes result from this, and as well, stop shit, that's what I'm looking for. As well, they've got a lot of good experience at kind of transcending their roles as 911 director and GIS managers to come together as a community and get their data, their GIS data, to be what it needs to be. So we want to start with a couple of discussion prompts, and that'll get us going. But then this is very much going to be a conversation, and we want the audience to be a part of that through the Q&A interface. So let's get started. So let's start with Jared. Tell us a little bit about your experience in bringing GIS and public safety communities together in your jurisdiction.
Okay, so I've been a director for about the last 5 years here at Dearborn County, and I've done a lot of work building the relationship with our current GIS folks next door. They work in a separate building than we do. We don't have anyone here on staff at the 911 center that does GIS per se. And we also have 3 different addressing authorities in our county. So I've done a lot of work trying to build those relationships and brought them all to the table and offered training. I've hosted like the NINA addressing for NG 911, where we've hosted that and had everyone come to that. And we've had other meetings. And most recently, I think what we've done is we've gotten a grant for the next Gen 911 grant from the federal government. And we've been able to pay for a couple vendors to come on board and help us get our data where it needs to be, and purchase some tools to use moving forward for like quality assurance or whatever.
Jared, I don't know if it's your experience, but with me in Santa Clara County, I had to go individually. I had to go seek out the elected officials in the cities, or the city administrators, and then I had to go see the GIS managers, and then I had to go see the public safety people and talk to them separately before I could really get them in a room together to actually have a good collaborative conversation. Has that been your all experience?
Yeah, it's all. I feel like it's all about building those relationships with each other and just getting out there and talking to them and bringing them in, letting them see what you do in your center, and just really showing them what the importance of GIS is for 911, especially moving forward in the NG world.
How about you,
I think in Jeff's slide, his initial introductory slide, identifying the players, right? We have addressing coordinators, we have PSAP managers, the GIS folk. And then as Jason mentioned, there's also those elected officials and those top line managers that need to be filled in on what's happening. And that's been one of the challenges that I faced, is understanding the playing field. What is that landscape of next gen 911 participants, and then working with each one of those individuals to try to develop those collaborative processes.
Yeah, it's definitely about storytelling, right? We have to be master storytellers to sell over our point and get their sense of urgency to come up with ours and be able to almost pitch it for us. So like some other stakeholders that I had to think about were the police, the sheriff, the fire chief, and the director of EMS and things like that.
And that storytelling component is important because each person that you're collaborating with has a different framework from which to enter this project, right? For myself, it's more GIS centric, but for that addressing coordinator that might not use the GIS tools for maintaining addresses, you might have a different story to tell that might be unrelated to public safety, but more focused on the accuracy of your data. So it's developing those stories for each of your clients or each of the people that you meet along the way.
I think a lot of it too is learning the different languages that 911 has, and then also the languages that GIS people use. They're just different, and you just have to educate yourself and educate the GIS people, you know, what we need, and I think vice versa, they need to educate 911 folks as far as what they need.
Jared, you could not speak the truth more. 2 years before I joined Baker, I really didn't have a concept of what GIS was until a couple GIS analysts that were working in the building and supporting us kind of jumped up and like shaking their hands, like, you gotta pay attention to us. And I'm like, honestly, I don't even know what you do. I trust you. You handle our maps, and I know that we can track police and fire equipment on maps, but I didn't really understand the power of the data behind it. And so they spent the better part of 3 months educating me, starting with like, what are the basic concepts, all the way to how does this interlay into what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, and you said it just before I had an opportunity, Jared. How was your experience as far as learning to speak geek with the GIS folks? Were you able to kind of like, how did you capture kind of the basic terminology that would mean something to them and then translate it into public safety terms for these disparate parties?
I think that just kind of goes back to hosting those classes. The NINA addressing for NG91 class was very helpful. Myself and some of my staff, along with our GIS people and our addressing authorities, we all went to that class. We had people from other communities come and join us, and we just really all learned from each other and shared them stories. We storytelled, and I think that's just how you learn. You just build relationships and collaborate with one another.
Okay, great. How about you, Gene? From the flip side, how was it for you kind of coming in, not knowing really public safety speak or kind of what the business was other than, saving lives? How was it for you coming into it, beginning to get your hands around what they do, how they do it, what are the systems they do it with? And then did you find yourself having to like imagine how you tell the GIS story?
Yeah, we often, here at Merced County, we often look at our GIS data as being kind of representational of what the facts are on the ground. But when you look at it through the lens of public safety, it has so much more meaning, and there's so much more of a emphasis put on accuracy. And so for us, it was a different mindset on how we look at our data. So with that, looking at some of the NINA standards and identifying how data created in a public safety format really key for us, because that really shed light on what we need to do with data. And in partnering with Michael Baker on doing some of our remediation work, that has really been a good learning experience for myself. And hopefully through that learning experience, I can work with other staff in our county and our jurisdictions to help convey that message of looking at accurate data, how it's being deployed for public safety use now. And then working with our addressing authorities, using that as a theme for them to get on board with what we're doing. So it's been a challenge. I think one of the benefits that we have is that we work with the Council of Governments. They're acting as an intermediary with our addressing coordinators and our GIS to bring that data into a consolidated format. I think what we're looking at now is more bringing that up into the mainstream and using technology to help us facilitate that coordination between the addressing authorities and our GIS.
Great. Jared, tell me a little bit about what you think like the most important lessons learned that you've learned that others in the audience think, that you think that others in the audience could really benefit from learning as well in this sort of journey that you're in the middle of, right? There's not a destination to this necessarily, but you've started it up and you've found some success. What are the lessons you've learned as a 911 director that would help those in the audience, you know, start to reach out to their addressing authorities and GIS counterparts?
I think the biggest thing is just getting out there. They're not going to come to you. You really need to go to them and show them how important this is. The education part is big. Having those conversations, whether it may mean taking them to lunch or something even. You know, food always talks to people. If you feed them, they're going to listen usually. So I think the biggest lessons I've learned is just really educating all the stakeholders, trying to bring them all to the table. And then also, you know, it's not something that everybody knows everything about, especially myself. I don't claim to know everything about it. You gotta connect with the vendors out there and use their expertise and stuff to get your mission accomplished.
You know, you're educated. Sorry, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I like the way that you put the fact that they're not going to come to you, and I think that's a true statement. And in some cases, we've worked with people like Gene as well, where from a GIS perspective, the public safety community is not going to come to you unless they know there's something that you can do for them, because they're busy answering phone calls, especially these days, right? As need for public safety services and medical aids have skyrocketed lately. Gene, tell us a little bit about your experience with it being the flip side, where you started to hear about this from a GIS perspective, and then you had to go to your 911 folks and say, hey, I think I can help you with this need.
Right, and some of my experiences were that those PSAP authorities really didn't know a lot about GIS, and to that extent, the implications of GIS with NextGen. So that was kind of a learning curve for them to get up to speed on what their obligations were. But I think it's also important to look at the different constituents, not only at the local level with your addressing authorities, maybe your council of governments that also work on address and GIS data, but also looking to the state and seeing what role the state plays in implementing NextGen. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the state of California is implementing a rather large NextGen 911 process. They've implemented a task force or charged a task force to look at how we can roll this out throughout the state. So that's been a big initiative that's been going on, and staying connected with that state entity, Cal OES, and understanding more about what their obligations are and how that work is going to trickle down to the local jurisdictions keeps me more aware of what is happening outside of our county. And then also looking at NENA and looking at the standards that they've implemented for the nation really gives me a more of a perspective on how this is going to be rolled out. The challenges, though, is that communication process and starting to open up those pipelines of communication with your local jurisdictions and looking at what their capacity is for implementing this type of work. I've done an initial assessment on our addressing coordinators. I kind of understand that not a lot of them do GIS work. They have a more antiquated method, I guess you could say, of developing address data for their local jurisdictions. So I know that I would have to work with them more intensely on the GIS end to get them up to speed on some of the terminology. But then there's other entities that have a little more experience that you can kind of dial it down a little. So it's really a mixed bag.
Great.
Okay.
Jason, I love the story that you tell about, you know, how you really didn't understand what, you know, Steve and Dan were wanting so badly from you, and your sort of evolution as a 911 director, coming to realize that there was great value in what they were offering. What were kind of the lessons you learned in that experience?
Well, first of all, just the power of what they could offer me. I think that I was frankly ignorant to everything that they could do for me and how interactive they could make it, how fast they could spin it up, the way they could present the information, even to me as an executive, as like a dashboard on my PC, to really see what's happening operationally. Because sometimes as a director, you can get a little desperate from your actual operations folks, and so you really want to make sure you stay in touch and you really understand what's happening. And so they really taught me everything that I needed to be armed with to arm my colleagues around the county. We had 15 other 911 centers in the county of Santa Clara, and so I'm sorry, 15 other jurisdictions, and that's a lot of people to try to wrangle to get to do any one thing. So that's super important. And one thing I wanted to piggyback off of Gene on was that relationship with the state. A lot of the states around the country have funding available for projects like this, and so you should really do some homework on what state funding opportunities there are that may just be out there and you're not aware of them.
And with that, looking at opportunities for collaborating around funding, we were able to work with our local jurisdictions to pull our funding together, and that helped us do our implement our remediation work project. So that alone really kickstarted us moving forward in earnest on our next gen. I think without that funding, we still would have been trying to figure out how could we get this started.
Yes, and then when you bring the money to the elected officials, they're a little less restrictive of giving you that permission, right?
Right. Yeah, there was almost a unanimous decision by all of our local jurisdictions, our 6 cities, to implement this in a coordinated fashion. So we were really blessed with having that funding available for this work.
Jared, is there any funding in Indiana to handle these sort of projects right now?
We were blessed with getting the NG 911 grant from the federal government. It came down through the states or whatever, that last go around of money that we were able to put towards some GIS projects that we're doing here. As far as the state level, I think we would have to use our wireless, or they're not wireless funds anymore, but our 911 funds that come into the counties.
Gotcha.
Use that for GIS projects.
And for those of you that are in California, there are state funding streams available through Cal OES. There are CETNA funds, and those have been allotted to each county. There's different funding models for each jurisdiction. I think there's a flat rate or a flat fee that they, well, not a fee, but grants that they would provide to each jurisdiction. So there is money available for some of this work. And again, connecting with the state, connecting with OES through their GIS task force, having relationships with those individuals would really give you a better sense of what your obligations would be.
Great. So the next topic for me is, I can tell you my experience before I was on this side of the coin. I worked for a large metropolitan 911 authority in Texas, and it was there that I came in as kind of a GIS expert that knew nothing about 911, but I connected really quickly with the life-saving mission of 911, of public safety, and it really became a true passion of mine to make sure that the work that I was doing had purpose and meaning. I want to hear from each of you how, from the 911 director perspective, how did you help your GIS folks connect with that mission? And then from Gene's perspective, how did you get connected, to the work with purpose idea that you find while working with 911? Let's start with you, Jared.
You like starting with me, I think, Jeff, don't you? Anyways, I'm in our county here. I was pretty fortunate. Our past GIS official, her husband is a fire chief, or was a fire chief, so that really helped. And she's also an EMT as well. She ran as an EMT, so they already kind of knew what our mission was, and we're connected that way. Since then, she's left, but there's another person that's stayed on over there, and we've really just connected. They understand the importance of the data that we need. You know, we have to have the location to send somebody there, so I'm pretty sure that they're all pretty well connected already.
How about you, Jason?
Sure. So, you know, I think the most important thing there is, again, it's storytelling. I know as a person that's been in 911 for a decade, just in that one niche area, I have tons of stories, stories that I can tell about how location is so important and how without a good location, we can not only not find the caller, but we can't get the help to them that they need. And so for me, it was really about selling the idea, the concept of public safety. We were at a conference, I think in Washington, Jeff, where we heard Ty Wooten, who's the director of education for NENA. And one of the things that kind of really stood out to me as part of his keynote was he really empowered GIS folks in the room as the next first responder. And that is so true. We really need to get our GIS folks as educated and as empowered as we can about public safety, because without them, we're not going to be able to accomplish the job that we have to do so critically. So for me, it's all about making sure that they know they're empowered, that they know that we can give them resources. You know, a lot of times it's a lot easier for us to find funding sources in public safety than it is for them, because they usually sit in IT infrastructure or maybe even a standalone infrastructure, but don't have the voice that a police chief, a fire chief, or a 911 director have upward. So,
Jason, you brought up a good point. Something else that I've done here is added my GIS folks to our NENA group memberships and our APCO group memberships to really put them on there as part of the team. They get the emails and they have access to all those resources that we do as well.
Yep, get them involved.
Yep.
How about you, Gene?
Yeah, I've been the GIS manager here for the county for the last 5 years. And it was early on that I recognized the importance of GIS for public safety. But it was a real eye-opener to look back at my data and to understand more about its accuracy and it being authoritative information. And it was only until I started the partnership with our vendors that I was able to understand more of how important this information is for public safety. And then when I found out our department manages the GIS data for our CAD system, and then looking at that data in the CAD system, knowing the issues that it faced, it really impressed the importance of me on providing more accurate information for our CAD systems. And I think it has a spin-off benefit, not only in serving our public safety needs, but in all of our other needs with all of our other departments. Having accurate data is so important, and it's easy to set out the disclaimers for GIS that it's for viewing only, and it's not meant to be used as a public or a tool for validation work. NextGen changes that whole concept, and I think it's really going to kick up our GIS game, so to speak, and make it more of a centralized set of information that I think could be used for all agencies within our jurisdiction.
It's funny what you say about data quality, Gene. You know, we've had clients that have come and told us how much value they're getting in it. We did it for a public safety purpose, but we've had clients have cost recovery from permitting and of finding addresses that they didn't even know they had because they had siloed or disparate data sets and they weren't communicating with one another. So you're right, and that's a great, another way to tell the story is there's so much added value with data quality, and not just within public safety, even though that is for us the most important thing, but in general government. Jeff, I know one of the benefits of having the three of us is I represent a really large populace. Gene is a medium-sized populace, and Jared kind of represents a more rural community. What's your experience in the difference in data quality in those three areas? Are they different? Do they have different challenges? Jeff?
You're asking me. We're flipping the script on the interviewer here, aren't we?
Did a good job.
So yeah, it's a very valid point that, you know, the GIS data concerns of a rural entity versus a mid-size or large entities are very different. You know, I have in a lot of my presentations what I call the data quality baseball that lists kind of the 5 dimensions of data quality. And the first one is, do you even have data to start with? And I think that's probably a big challenge for rural settings, even in a medium setting. And you'd be surprised maybe at how big of a challenge it is for large entities as well, because there's a lot of patchwork of what I refer to as GIS haves and have-nots across all of those collections of entities and different types of folks. So not only do you have questions of data availability, but also of completeness where there is data available. Is it complete enough to do the job it needs to do? They're big questions. And then you jump into data quality. If you don't have what you need and it isn't complete, then your data quality assessments are going to be very different as well. So they definitely face unique challenges. Some of the challenges as well are just the availability of GIS resources. You know, a lot of rural counties, and I'm sure Jared could shed some light on it. You already talked about how your GIS person was actually an EMT as well, kind of maybe secondary. GIS was her secondary job, not sure in your specific case, but oftentimes in those more rural areas, you'll have somebody who's, you know, a dispatch supervisor who is really good at Excel spreadsheets, and they get handed an Esri license and say, hey, now you're going to do this GIS thing. And they have to figure it out, and that's a challenge for them. In other places, you find a firefighter. I had, even in San Diego here, where I live and worked prior to working with Datamark, I had a firefighter at the city of Chula Vista who just was very passionate about location data, because he knew on a firsthand experience how many times he was routed to either the wrong address or couldn't get enough information at a granular enough level to know which gate to approach the apartment complex to, and it delayed the medical response and had, you know, dire consequences for him. That those secondary GIS, what I refer to as secondary GIS folks, are very prevalent in across all of these different setups of agencies. And so the challenges of gathering data in a rural setting are definitely different than the challenges of gathering it in a medium-sized or large entity as well.
Gene, was there any surprises when you stepped into your role in Merced that you were shocked, that you would have thought, you would have thought you would have or would not have had something, and then you wound up being surprised?
Yeah, and it was less of a pleasant surprise in that, you know, coming from a GIS background, I kind of assumed that all of our addressing authorities and those individuals that create addressing were doing it in GIS.
Video.
Come to find out, there's only a handful of us that do GIS work, and not all of us are doing it for address creation. And so really looking at those addressing coordinators, knowing that they don't currently have the technical capacity to do more in-depth GIS analysis, and they probably shouldn't. I mean, they're not trained, or they haven't been you know, involved in doing GIS work as an analyst or a technician, but they do have other skills in address creation. And so leveraging those experiences from those individuals, and as well as the talents that GIS professionals have in our jurisdiction, and creating partnerships around those different skill sets, and using technology to act as that middleware, or that middleman that can consolidate the talents of GIS and the addressing coordinators without having to introduce new skill sets for these individuals, I think is key for me. And I think we've been successful in looking at maintenance strategies for these different individuals, those that are fluent in GIS and those that aren't, and bringing those people together to assist in this solution.
All right, great. So we have about 20 minutes left. And what I want to hear from each of you to start with in those 20 minutes is, what are the 3 things that you think are most important as a 911 professional, Jared or Jason, that your GIS people understand? And then Gene, what are the 3 things that you think are most important from a GIS perspective for your 911 professionals to understand? Let's shake up the order and start with you, Gene.
I think chief among it, and I just reiterated this or mentioned this earlier, is that for me, it's recognizing that not everybody does the same thing in terms of using GIS for whatever capacity that they have, and recognizing that there's different skill sets that are coming into this project, and really being able to harness those skills and make them work together in an orchestrated fashion is important. That's probably my primary takeaway, is knowing that we're not all coming at this at the same with the same lens, I guess you could say. That our addressing coordinators might not know much about public safety and how their work fulfills a need in CAD dispatching, and then for the GIS analyst that is doing work that's important for GIS, but having that grounding in public safety and knowing that that also provides a critical need. And then your PSAP managers and your CAD dispatchers, they probably don't see the GIS behind the scenes, but they know that address information and location information is critical to their operations.
Great. So I love the fact that you didn't say coordinate systems, points, lines, and polygons, and shape files or file databases. So I think the biggest lesson that GIS nerds have to learn is that nobody but us care about those things, right? And it sounds like you've learned that lesson for sure, Gene, so thanks for that. How about you, Jared? What do you think the most important 911 concepts are for GIS folks to understand?
I think it's very important that they understand that over 80% of our calls in the 911 center now come from wireless devices. We're not getting address information. We're getting hopefully an X and Y coordinates for these callers. So I think it's very important that they understand that, and understand that location is very important to a 911 call taker. The first question that we ask everyone is the most important question that we could ask anyone. If we don't have an accurate location or a dispatchable location, we can't get help to those that need help. So that's probably the number one thing that I feel that GIS needs to understand when it comes to 911.
Great. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, they both gave great responses. The bottom line is the basic concepts, right? Understanding, just like Jared said, the call the call location, how do we get it in? But I think also, what systems are we using? Because almost every system in public safety now uses location in some way, whether it be our CAD system, our CPE, or call handling environment, our logging recorders. Everything has some sort of GIS based need. And so we've also found that those can be disparate. There might be one set of data in one and another in another, and that's also not good for public safety. So I think once we get them to dive in with us and really look hard at our systems and how we're using GIS, almost from a needs assessment perspective, they can almost help us learn what we need to do differently to make it happen, and work with the vendor partners to see how that can happen in a more streamlined way.
Great. So we got a question in the Q&A. I think it'd be good to get everybody's perspective on. Brian asks, in the panel, talked about how the GIS organization is related to other stakeholders, public safety, other agencies, partners outside the agencies. Does anyone have a good idea where a quote-unquote GIS agency or GIS specialist creating data should sit within the entire organization? Should GIS be a part of public safety, be in its own department, or not centralized? So it's a really good question, Brian, and I think we can all acknowledge, first of all, that all of those organizations happen all over the place, right? So before I get you guys' perspective on that, I just want to point out that this has been a big GIS question throughout all of GIS's, history. Where should the GIS organization sit in an organization? Should it be a centralized corporate resource? Should it be funded then that way? Does each department need to have their own experts? And I'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think, Jason? Start with you.
Sure. So I was laughing a little as I read the question because I think in government, one thing that we're super is a big part of our world is that we're controlling. We want that resource. So as a 911 director, I would say, I want that resource. I want it in public safety because I want them to know my business and only work in my business. But one thing I learned as I have been talking to people and as I grew up learning about GIS and how it can function is I personally like a more centralized approach. And I found that it worked really well in a large setting because I had 2 GIS analysts dedicated to my organization from our IT division, but they could also spin up additional resources if I needed them to. And so if I would have had them by myself and they were isolated to just my department, I wouldn't be able to have access to additional resources, funding, and staff when necessary. So though I would say that we're generally selfish and want it all to ourselves, I think that might not be the best approach.
I also see the
perspective.
benefits of a centralized approach in administering GIS data. I've been over the last several years, I've come across data sets that are coming from different sources, same data types, and not knowing which is authoritative or not. Being able to centralize that information and centralize a process for maintenance really serves, I think, our county in a much more efficient way. It cuts down on a lot of editing time, maintenance time, when you're dealing with one source of information. And having that data centralized in your servers in your IT rather than in different silos lessens the obscurity or the notions of who has what data and which data is more accurate. And I think that's important for public safety as well.
Great. How about you, Jared?
I would have to agree. I think the centralized approach for GIS is probably the best approach. However, I know depending on the size of the government or the community, looking at my neighbors to the south, they're 911 director there. They're a very small county. They have to do the addressing and put it on the map themselves. They don't have anyone to do it for them. So I think it all just depends on how many resources you have and things like that. I know there's places out there that even do like regional approaches to it, where there's maybe a multiple government jurisdiction or whatever, where they all come together or intergovernment agency, I guess you would call it, where they've all come together and created a GIS consortium or whatever.
Great. Yes. So here's a question for you as well. This is an anonymous attendee gave this one. It's more of a statement, but let's turn it into a question. One of the first hurdles for GIS is actually being invited to the table initially and not as an afterthought, they say. What do you think is kind of like the best thing? This to me sounds like a GIS person perspective. What do you think, Jared and Jason especially, what's the best way for a GIS person to approach a 911 entity and say, listen, I think I have something of value for you here, and I'd really like to participate. How can I get you up to speed on this? What do you think the best way to do that is?
Oh, I think it's hard, Jeff. I think we have to, as public safety officials, learn to be better, thoughtful leaders and bring people to the table more proactively. I've met both types of folks where either they don't know to come to the table, or they're not sure how, like you said, how to approach it. And so my tendency would be, we should be doing the outreach to them proactively. We should learn about what they can offer us, and then that will lead to a much more conducive relationship.
Gene or Jared?
I would agree with you, Jason. I believe, when I took over, that was the big thing I started to do, was reaching out to my address authorities, reaching out to my GIS professionals, because I knew I did not have all the answers. I needed their expertise to help us do what we needed to do here. And I brought them in. They're familiar with our CAD system and things like that as well. So it's just about creating those relationships back and forth.
And I think there's a role for us as we begin to learn more about NextGen and what all the requirements are, is to be a facilitator. We might know more about what our role is in terms of our GIS responsibilities, but then there's those dispatching managers and PSAP coordinators that also have an understanding from their perspective. But then tying those individuals in with our addressing coordinators and local, political authorities that might not have a lot of information about what's coming down the road with public safety needs, and acting as that facilitator and sharing that information. I think that's also a good way of understanding more of what these processes are, what roles people play in this process, and getting an overall perspective of what the landscape is for your local jurisdictions.
Great. So we've got about 10 minutes left, a couple more questions, see if we can get them answered. These are great questions. So Elizabeth says, within our county, we have a collaborative group represented by multiple addressing authorities to discuss address inconsistencies, addressing for new developments, etc. This group was put together by staff trying to improve the quality of addressing in our area. Sometimes an address with issues could impact emergency response, has roadblocks to being fixed, such as property owners not wanting to change their legal documentation. Do you have any advice on challenging the, oh, well, we've tried fixing it before mentality to get better results? We have a single authoritative database for the county and municipalities. What do you guys think? That sounds like fatalism to me.
I think what helped us...
Go ahead, Gene, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I think what helped us make the leap was knowing that there's technology now that's available for jurisdictions that might not have the capacity to administer GIS address information, that they could then use whatever methods they have now to place addresses for new subdivisions, let's say, kind of in a method that is developed in a coordinated fashion, right? And technology really provides that role for creating that link for those non-GIS users to add their information into a geospatial repository for address and road centerline data. So I think if you look at it from a perspective of acquiring new technology, it's a lot more simpler to make that leap over.
And I think the other side of that too is sometimes the hardest part of this sort of situation is the governance piece and is the how to influence people. So, the only way that those sort of issues can be changed is by getting elected officials involved in their districts, kind of helping ease the path to make it okay. I know, again, coming from Santa Clara County, there was a ton of affluent people in that community that got whatever they wanted and simply wouldn't do what we would want them to do. So it's definitely an uphill battle and one that is, takes years, not weeks.
Yeah, I know in our county, they've created, the county has an ordinance to change someone's address or whatever. And part of that ordinance is they send out letters and, things like that to inform them that this is why your address needs to be changed, and explains the process to them and why it's important. So again, it's kind of educating the public of what's the importance of them changing their address. I think that's the biggest thing that you have to do, is educate that property owner as to why they need to change it.
Yeah, I can share some of my experience in my role in Texas. I was not an addressing authority. I worked for the 911 network, but I was kind of I or others from our office were kind of the heavy hitters. Whenever there was one of these issues that would come up, that kept coming up again and again, they would call our office and ask for somebody to come speak at, to your point, Jason, a council meeting or some sort of a elected official or political appointee type, where we could say with the authority of the 911 network behind us that if you don't fix this, it may result in a public safety problem. And so many of those people in those roles are motivated more as much by liability issues as they are, funding or other considerations. And having that the weight of that liability really behind it often helped with that. Sometimes somebody says, well, we already tried to fix this, why try again? Like the only way to fix that attitude is to get the person that has it out of the way. But that's not always a great option, or something that, especially somebody from a GIS perspective or technical or lower level perspective can even do. But I think you're right, Jason, is that sometimes there's a political solution to a problem that may be achievable and may not be.
Yeah, it goes back to storytelling, Jeff.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. That's a really good point. If you can tell that story with the right emphasis on the syllables, then the message gets through. We got another question. Keep those coming. Although we only have 6 minutes left here, so but we'd love to answer what we can, and if we can't, we'll add some notes to it for after. Says, as a GIS support person to E911, I start each task for E911 with the mindset that what I do today could help save someone's life tomorrow. That's a great point, good comment, and talk about owning, sort of making the life-saving mission of 911 as part of your ethos. That's really good. Another one, my 911 agency hired me as their GIS analyst a tad over 2 years ago. One of the biggest things I can recommend is to create and maintain those relationships with your addressing partners, which I think all three of you guys have really emphasized was key to your success as well. It says, when I came on, one of the first things I did was to reach out and inform our many addressing authorities what I do and how I can help. Back to that storytelling, right? And although I'm not the addressing authority for our county, actually have many addressing authorities, I do ensure the correct address is in our 911 CAD system and are able to be verified. Count on them to let me know when issues arise, and we are constantly working great together today to make our systems the best they can be. And I think, Jared, you've emphasized very well the importance of those relationships as well. Catherine throws in a little story map plug here too. You can engage your GIS staff with the idea of telling the story through the use of story maps. Great. That is a very useful medium actually for telling stories.
And actually, Jeff, I think that would be that's something I didn't know about and I did not leverage, but frankly, I should have learned about story mapping and use that to leverage the power of GIS when doing presentations to elected officials and other department heads.
Yeah, I think we have a great example in this COVID-19 outbreak of a lot of really good, stories being told about location across maps, a lot of places. So let's wrap this up. We do just have a couple minutes here, and the next session is going to get started. But I guess a good way to go out might just be, there you go. That's right. They're calling in that's the tap on the arm for the relief pitcher. You guys, as you head out, Jared, let's start with you just for old time's sake. Give us your one last message for the audience here about getting these communities together.
I think I'm going to use the COVID-19 slogan. We're in this together. As 911 professionals, as GIS professionals, we're in this together. and we just got to give each other what we need to accomplish our missions at the end of the day.
Really good. How about you, Gene?
Trying to identify as many resources as possible that can help you through this process. I know that looking at the NINA standards and reviewing those, that really acquainted me with all the obligations that we have as GIS staff, but also looking at your state partners. Is there anybody in your state entities that are driving a statewide initiative? And how can you collaborate through those mechanisms? And then again, you know, reaching out to your local jurisdictions are really important. They're key to understanding what their maintenance processes are for their authoritative data sets, and then trying to aggregate that information. What kind of capacity as a county or a regional entity do you have to aggregate information in a way that's going to benefit public safety?
Great. And Jason?
I'm going to keep mine really short. Feel empowered, no matter which side you're on, feel empowered to reach out to your counterpart.
Great. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for being a part of the panel here. Hope it was of value for everybody in attendance. And we will end this meeting so that the next one can get started. Enjoy the rest of our virtual conference here and have a great day.
Thanks.